What's real? And what's just TV drama? BMF Season 1 takes us back to the streets of Detroit in the 1980s, showing two brothers trying to build an empire from nothing. But here's the question. Did it really happen that way? Or is Hollywood rewriting history? The truth about Big Meech Terry and the Black Mafia family is even more shocking than the show. Let's pull back the curtain and break it down. The very first season of BMF sets the stage with Detroit in the late 1980s. We see Meech and Terry as two young men trying to balance family responsibilities with their growing desire for money and power. The show opens with gritty scenes of poverty, tension inside their home, and clashes with rivals on the street. It paints a picture of two kids surrounded by crime and struggle, almost as if they had no other choice but to dive into hustling. But the truth is a little more layered. In real life, Demetrius, Big Meech Flenory, and Terry Southwest T Flenory were indeed born and raised in Detroit during tough economic times. The city was collapsing from factory shutdowns, layoffs, and rising crime. Many neighborhoods were struggling with drugs, gangs, and lack of opportunity. For Meech and Terry, hustling started as a way to survive, but also as a way to dream bigger than their environment allowed. They weren't simply forced into crime. They chose a path they thought would bring them money, respect, and a future far beyond what Detroit could offer. In the show, we see their parents portrayed as strict but loving, trying hard to push their kids toward an honest life. This detail is close to reality. The Flenory brothers did have a family that wanted them to avoid the streets, but temptation was everywhere. By the mid-1980s, Detroit was one of the largest drug markets in the country, and young people who got into hustling could make more money in a week than their parents earned in months. The show highlights this by showing Terry working small jobs while Meech tries to convince him that the game can change their lives. In real life, that conversation did happen in its own way. Meech was the more outgoing, flashy brother who saw potential in building an organization, while Terry was careful, strategic, and wanted structure. Together, they became a perfect team. The first season also introduces the idea of the 50 Boys, the crew that Meech and Terry formed to take over local territory. In the show, this group feels like a small but determined army of teenagers ready to outsmart older, more established rivals. That's a dramatized version of something real. In truth, the Flenory brothers did begin with a small group of friends and loyal partners. They named themselves after the tiny $50 bags of cocaine they sold, which were affordable for Detroit customers. This branding was clever, simple, and effective. It allowed them to dominate their local market quickly. The show gets this detail right, showing how branding and loyalty became the building blocks of something much bigger. Now, when it comes to rivals, the show gives us one unforgettable character, Lamar. He's painted as a violent, unpredictable street boss who has it out for Meech and Terry. But here's the truth. Lamar as a single person never existed. He's actually a mix of different figures from Detroit's drug scene combined into one villain for dramatic effect. In reality, the brothers did face violent rivals, including older crews who had been running the streets before them. But there was no single Lamar who terrorized them in such a theatrical way. This is where Hollywood steps in, combining real threats into one face makes for better storytelling, even if it bends the facts. Another key difference lies in how fast the rise feels on screen. In BMF Season 1, the story moves quickly from small hustles to big moves, making it look like their empire was built almost overnight. In reality, it took years of slow, careful building. The Flenory brothers didn't just wake up one day as kings of Detroit. They earned their reputation by being consistent, smart, and fearless. They avoided making rookie mistakes that could get them caught early. They reinvested money, kept their circle tight, and learned from every deal. This patience was one of the biggest reasons BMF lasted as long as it did. The show also dives deep into family tension, especially between Terry and Meech. Season 1 highlights constant disagreements over how to run the business. Meech wanting to take bigger risks, while Terry wants more structure and safety. This conflict is based on truth. The brothers had different personalities and visions, and sometimes they clashed. But in real life, those disagreements didn't always happen in explosive arguments like on the show. They were more subtle. Terry often took the role of balancing out Meech's ambition with caution, but at the end of the day, they trusted each other. The TV version turns those differences into high drama, but in reality, their partnership was the glue that kept BMF strong in the beginning. By the end of season 1, viewers are left with a sense that Meech and Terry are just 2 steps away from greatness and 2 steps away from disaster. That's the tension that keeps audiences hooked, and while the real story is less flashy and more gradual, the truth remains. The Flenory brothers were planting the seeds of one of the largest drug empires in American history. As season 1 moves forward, we see Meech and Terry transform from 2 ambitious brothers into leaders of a crew with real weight in the streets. The show paints this with sharp scenes, corner takeovers, secret meetings, flashy cars rolling through Detroit neighborhoods, and tense face-offs with rivals. But how much of that is real? And how much is written for TV? In real life, the rise of the 50 Boyz was not just about flash. It was about discipline, loyalty, and strategy. The Flenory brothers knew that surviving in Detroit's drug game meant avoiding sloppy mistakes. In the show, Meech is often seen as the bold risk-taker, someone who's not afraid to stand out. That part is true. Meech had a natural charisma and a fearless attitude that drew people in. He loved to dress sharp, speak with confidence, and make his presence known. On the other hand, Terry had a more cautious side. The show often shows him as quiet but calculating, the one who looks at the long game. That balance between them was one of the main reasons their crew lasted. The show highlights how the 50 Boyz were different from other street crews. They weren't just selling, they were marketing. In the TV version, Meech explains how selling $50 bags made the product accessible and easy to move. This was exactly true in real life. The brothers understood branding before branding became a buzzword. By offering consistent product at a fixed price, they built a reputation. Customers trusted them, and word spread quickly. In the drug world, that kind of reliability is rare, and it gave them an edge over competitors who couldn't keep up. But let's talk about the violence. On screen, every week seems to bring a gun battle, a chase, or a standoff. It keeps viewers glued to their screens, but in reality, things didn't always go down like that. Yes, violence was a part of the streets. Yes, the brothers faced danger, but surviving for as long as they did required avoiding unnecessary bloodshed. Meech and Terry didn't want chaos in their business. They wanted order. Too much violence brought attention from police, and they understood that. So while the show creates unforgettable villains like Lamar to keep tension high, the real BMF story in Detroit was more about outsmarting rivals than outgunning them every week. The series also adds layers of personal drama, especially around Terry's injury. In the show, Terry is shot early in season 1, leading to constant arguments about whether he should stay in the game. This event is based on real life, but with creative adjustments. Terry really was shot in the eye during an early stage of their rise. That injury left him with partial vision loss, and it became a turning point in his life. In reality, the shooting did cause friction. His family wanted him to step back, and Terry himself thought about leaving. But in the end, he stayed, and that decision helped cement the 50 Boyz as a serious force. The show exaggerates some of the arguments and family tension, but the injury itself was a real and life-changing event. Another thing the series plays up is the pressure from law enforcement. Detective Bryant, the cop who becomes obsessed with bringing down Meech, serves as a constant thorn in their side. But here's where Hollywood steps in again. In reality, there wasn't one single detective focused on the brothers during their early days. Instead, there were many small investigations scattered across Detroit. Police knew the drug trade was growing, but the Flenory brothers were smart enough to keep their operations just below the radar. They weren't a top target yet. Detective Bryant is more of a composite character, representing the general pressure of police presence rather than one real individual. The show also dives deep into how Meech and Terry clashed with their parents. Their mother especially is portrayed as a woman of faith, constantly fighting to keep her sons from falling deeper into crime. This theme is rooted in reality. The Flenory parents were hardworking and wanted better for their kids. Their frustration was real because they knew exactly what the streets could take away. But the TV version amplifies the tension, giving us heated confrontations and emotional speeches. In truth, the family dynamic was complicated but not always as explosive as we see on screen. As BMF Season 1 moves toward its later episodes, the tone shifts. What started as a story about two brothers hustling to survive becomes a tale about ambition, loyalty, and power. The show adds layers of betrayal, revenge, and ruthless enemies, making it feel like the Flenory brothers are trapped in a crime movie. But when we separate the facts from the fiction, the reality was far more strategic and less theatrical. One of the show's biggest dramatic choices is the character of Lamar. He's unpredictable, dangerous, and almost larger than life. In the show, Lamar is painted as the brothers' biggest rival, someone who's always one step away from chaos. But in reality, Lamar never existed as a single person. He's a blend of different street figures, stitched together to create a central villain. The truth is, the Flenory brothers did have rivals. Detroit in the 1980s was full of small crews and older bosses who had been running the streets long before Meech and Terry stepped in. But instead of facing one clear, cartoon-like villain, the brothers had to deal with constant competition from multiple directions. Hollywood prefers one face for an enemy. It keeps the story focused and easy to follow. The downside is that it makes the real history look like a comic book war when, in fact, it was a long, grinding struggle for territory and respect. Another creative choice the show makes is exaggerating how fast betrayals happened inside the crew. Season 1 portrays the 50 Boyz as constantly dealing with moles, disloyal members, and people ready to switch sides at the first opportunity. There is some truth here. Any criminal organization will deal with backstabbing and betrayal. But in real life, during the early stages, the Flenory brothers actually maintained strong loyalty among their members. They were known for taking care of their people. If someone was struggling, Meech and Terry made sure they had money, clothes, and protection. That kind of leadership built trust. So while the show speeds up the drama by making betrayal a weekly event, the reality was that in the early years, loyalty was one of their strongest assets. The show also explores the brothers' personal relationships, especially Meech's romantic life. Viewers see him juggling love interests, using charm to smooth over problems, and sometimes getting distracted by women. This adds flavor to the story, but in truth, Meech's real life was even more extreme. He was known for being flashy, for partying hard, and for surrounding himself with people who loved his charisma. But when it came to business, he didn't let relationships cloud his focus. Terry, on the other hand, was more private and less flashy in real life than the show suggests. The series exaggerates some of his arguments with Meech to keep the drama high, but the reality is that both brothers were usually aligned when it came to big decisions. Another important storyline in Season 1 is the constant tension between the brothers and law enforcement. Detective Bryant and other police officers are portrayed as deeply invested in catching the brothers from the very beginning. But in real life, this wasn't the case. During their early Detroit years, the brothers weren't seen as the kind of major players who would trigger big investigations. They were successful, but not yet on the radar as national-level threats. The show condenses years of gradual growth into a single season, so the police presence feels heavier than it really was in the late 1980s. In truth, the brothers wouldn't feel the full weight of federal pressure until much later when their empire expanded outside Detroit. Family drama also plays a big role in the show. Meech and Terry's parents are shown as constantly arguing with their sons about choices, morals, and money. The show uses these moments to remind viewers that at the core of this empire are two young men being pulled between loyalty to family and loyalty to the streets. This theme is rooted in reality. Meech and Terry's parents did want them to live clean lives, and they did worrying about the path their sons were taking. But the explosive, tearful arguments on screen are a Hollywood touch. In real life, the family's concern was quieter, but always present. It wasn't all shouting matches, it was more disappointment, warnings, and attempts to guide the brothers back. By the final episodes of Season 1, the tension reaches a boiling point. In the TV version, it feels like the entire city is against. The Flenory brothers' rivals want them dead, cops want them locked up, and even their own family wants them to stop. The season ends with the feeling that Meech and Terry are walking on a knife's edge. But here's the difference. In real life, the brothers were just beginning. They weren't yet national players, and they weren't public enemy number one. What we see in the show as a season-ending climax was, in reality, only a small step in a much bigger journey. This is the key difference between the series and the truth. The show condenses drama into a handful of episodes to keep audiences hooked. Real life doesn't move that fast. The Flenory brothers spent years building slowly, taking losses, recovering, and moving carefully. Season 1 makes it look like an overnight empire, but the reality was a grind that took patience, intelligence, and time. By the time the credits roll on Season 1, audiences feel like they've witnessed the birth of a criminal dynasty, and in a way, they have, but the real story was just getting started. By the time BMF Season 1 reaches its final episodes, the tension is sky high. On screen, the Flenory brothers are at war with rivals, dodging the police, and trying to hold their family together, all while their small crew grows into something bigger than anyone imagined. The season ends with a cliffhanger, leaving the impression that they're already standing at the edge of greatness. But in real life, the story was still only at its opening chapter. The show ends with dramatic moments designed for TV impact: close calls with death, near arrests, and bitter betrayals. This makes sense for a crime drama because audiences want fireworks. But in reality, the brothers' lives weren't one long action scene. The true story was slower, steadier, and in some ways even more impressive because it showed how patient strategy can outlast pure chaos. Meech and Terry weren't just lucky street hustlers, they were thinkers, and they knew how to build something brick by brick. One of the main takeaways from Season 1 is the bond between Meech and Terry. On screen, it looks fragile at times, as if one wrong step could break their partnership. The show highlights their constant arguments, their differences in vision, and the strain caused by Terry's injury and his growing responsibilities as a father. But while it's true the brothers had different personalities, Meech being bold and outgoing, Terry being cautious and calculated, their bond in real life was much stronger than the series sometimes suggests. They trusted each other deeply. That trust became the foundation of BMF. Without it, they never could have gone as far as they did. Another key part of the Season 1 ending is how the show frames the 50 Boys as a movement that's unstoppable. The crew is seen making money, running corners, and holding their own against anyone. The reality is that, yes, the 50 Boys gained a reputation in Detroit, but it wasn't yet the empire people think of when they hear BMF. At this stage, the brothers were still hustling locally, still figuring out logistics, and still learning lessons about loyalty and expansion. Their influence was growing, but it was far from the nationwide reach they would later achieve. The show compresses this rise into one season, but in real life, this part of the story stretched over years. The season finale also plays up the idea that law enforcement was closing in. Detective Bryant's obsession with Meech suggests that the walls are already closing, that one wrong move could bring everything crashing down. But historically, this wasn't true yet. During the late 1980s and early 1990s, local police knew the Flenory brothers were players in Detroit, but they weren't seen as a top priority. The real heat wouldn't come until much later, when their operations expanded into multiple states and drew the attention of federal agencies. So while the show gives us the feeling of an empire already under siege, the truth is that the brothers had plenty of time left to build. What's important about the ending of Season 1 is the way it captures ambition. Meech and Terry are shown looking beyond Detroit, imagining bigger possibilities, and setting the stage for something national. That part is very real. Even in their early days, Meech especially had a vision for something larger than street corners. He wanted to build not just a drug crew but an organization structured, disciplined, and far-reaching. That dream of expansion would become the blueprint for BMF's rise in later years. So what can we say about Season 1 as a whole? The show gives us the energy, the danger, and the excitement of young men turning into street bosses. It dramatizes rivalries, creates fictional villains like Lamar, and compresses years of slow progress into a handful of thrilling episodes. But the real story is both less dramatic and more incredible. It's less about weekly shootouts and sudden betrayals and more about patience, organization, and the unique partnership between two brothers. The truth is, Season 1 shows the feeling of what it was like to be Meech and Terry in Detroit, the ambition, the hunger, the risks, but not the exact details. Hollywood made it more explosive so viewers would stay hooked. But when we look at the real timeline, what's most impressive is how the Flenory brothers managed to take a small operation, stay disciplined, and grow into one of the largest drug empires in America.